What's up, Epic 7? A new balance patch just dropped, caught a lot of us off guard. I think a lot of us forgot that with the E7 World Cup kind of throwing a rock in the puddle that was the balance patch schedule, that this one was due. But here we are, and oh my goodness, did they change a lot. I think it's safe to say that this patch changes everything. So without further ado, let's jump in and talk about the good, the bad, and the frustrating with this balance patch. First, they want to sincerely appreciate all the support of our heirs who have continued their adventures with an Epic 7. With this adjustment, we plan to implement changes to 16 heroes and 4 artifacts, as well as a system change, so they're changing a mechanic too. These changes are scheduled to take effect on October 24th, so we're a little under a month away from these changes going live. So these aren't going to happen overnight, but they're coming our way pretty fast. Let's go over all of the units that are getting changed. So, wow. Ruele of Light, who desperately needed a change. This girl is so outdated that she was really only even alive in Epic 6. Her kit is very, very 2019. She's one of the OG heroes, and she has just fallen out of the meta because of her long cooldowns and her very, very basic kit when compared to more modern kits. Same story with Silverblade Aramintha. This is a 2019 unit, and although she's had some tweaks here and there, her kit still makes her very difficult to use. So hopefully they did some good things because she's a redhead and they deserve it. Last Rider Krau was the meta for a couple of seasons. And being a damage-dealing knight, he's just kind of fallen off because there are a lot of damage-dealing knights that just have a more amazing kit. Commander Pavel, we're in a world where Commander Pavel's extreme damage just doesn't quite do enough. So I suspect we'll see some damage boosting to Pavel and hopefully make him a functional cleave support unit again. Designer Lilibet, we all expected to be the great savior of the Harsetti Armageddon that was heading our way. Remember that? When everybody was sure Harsetti was going to end the game? That was fun. But it turns out Designer Lilibet's kit doesn't work any more than anyone else's kit against Harsetti, so everybody's ready to throw her back in the dumpster, so it's nice to see them giving the designer a little bit of love so that maybe she can be brought back into the game. Twisted, Eidolon, Kayron, one of the coolest units in the game. A lot of fun in Arena, but that's really the only place. They've tried buffing him a couple of times in the past, and nothing's really stuck. He's incredibly difficult to build and very difficult to keep alive to do his tricks, so hopefully they did something good for Techron. Melissa, for the 25th time in balance patches, Melissa was getting slowly better and better and better, and then they finally achieved Nirvana where she was very good, very pickable. People were cleaving into Emperor with her. She was a powerhouse unit, and then they did a buff that nerfed her kit so hard that she's not completely removed from the game. She used to be able to S2 into S3 and target a single unit and tank bust that unit, remove it from the game, and they changed her kit to where now she doesn't do good damage. She's supposed to hit multiple units. They made her kit work the way it was intended to work, and all it did was make her completely useless in the game. So maybe the 26th time's the charm and Melissa will be good again. Ice says, this isn't Specimen says, this is the blue one. I think he just needed a little bit of a nudge to be better, especially in Guild Wars. We'll see what they did for him. I was excited about Sez into the Ilanov meta because Sez's damages aren't really affected by Ilanov that much, but he still hasn't seen any play. Elena? Did Elena need a buff, anybody? Was this unit not being used like everywhere? So I guess we're buffing Elena again. God King Pirate Captain Samurai Mort is getting a buff, so let's see what they did for the Great Mortelix. Hopefully it makes him the God King he deserved to be. Yulha used to be really, really, really good, and she has fallen off quite a bit. She just doesn't quite bring the pain like she used to in this super tanky meta. Blooming Lidica is an interesting one to buff. I wonder if this is reactionary to Harsetti or if they're just trying to increase her usability. She was used in a certain esoteric kind of cleave, so maybe they'll do something for that. Oxlots has me scared, guys. The last time they tried to buff Oxlots, it was a nightmare. The community outraged and Smilegate wound up backpedaling because what they tried to do to this guy was basically remove him from the game. The 4-star that probably needs a buff more than anybody, Peacemaker Furious, is finally getting some love. Hopefully something good happens to this guy, because in game and in lore, everyone hated Furious. I guess Veronica needed a buff for reasons, so we're going to buff Veronica and green Armin, who in my opinion is one of the best counter-cleave units in the game, and now she's getting buffed to be better. We're also buffing the artifact Cruel Mischief. I guarantee you this is in reaction to the fact that the best Hall of Trials artifacts out there are a couple of collaboration artifacts, and they're doing something to Cruel Mischief to make it actually better than artifacts that can't be obtained anymore. We're buffing RNL because I guess this artifact needed to be better. Pure White Trust definitely needed to be better. Hopefully they do something cool with that. And Hostess of the Banquet surprises me the least because we're on the cusp of a Gala Lilius banner. So of course they want to give you more reasons to pull on the limited event banner. And the system improvement they're changing is how extra turns work. So let's see what craziness they do to extra turns. So the first on the list, and the one that most people DMing me about saying they're excited for, is Ruele of Light. So, Ruele of Light's S1, Key Oath. Key to an Oath, Oath Key. Key to her Oath skill. She used to just S1 and heal the ally with the lowest health. Very, very basic. And they've changed it to, now when she S1s, she heals all allies instead of just one. And to compensate, they're reducing the amount she heals, which makes sense, right? If she healed 1,000 health here, maybe she's going to heal 400 health to all the allies for a total of 1,600 health healed. So it's technically more healing, but it's a lower number because it's spread out. So that makes sense to me. Light Pillar. Light Pillars are S2 skill. It used to increase the combat readiness of the caster by 25%. This was her only source of tempo, and it was important because she has got no source of tempo, and she has very long skill cooldowns. So they are getting rid of that, making her even harder to cycle. But now her S2 grants a barrier and damage limit to the unit that you put it on. So she's going to be able to put a damage limiter on a unit, making that unit harder to kill. She's basically giving Gala's passive to a unit, and she's giving them a barrier, meaning you're going to have to hit them like 3 times to punch through the barrier and the health and the damage limit and the kill. It's going to make this a great way to make a unit very difficult to kill. And for her S3, they're not changing anything, they're just adding on to it that at the start of the battle, grants Spirit Lord's protection to the caster. And Spirit Lord protection means upon receiving lethal damage, she will revive with 50% health and increase combat readiness by 50%. So, let me spell this out for you. If somebody tries to kill Ruele, she'll die, come right back, heal half of her health, more than what would happen with Maid Chloe's buff on her, and CR push halfway down the line, which means if you kill her anytime after the 50% mark on the CR bar, she will come back to life and go all the way to the bottom line, and then she'll be able to use other skills. Maybe an S1 for a heal, maybe an S2 where she will give herself a barrier and damage limiter so it's harder to kill her still. Because she can cast this on herself and give herself the damage limit and the barrier. But we'll see. Let's talk about something better. Let's talk about a redhead. Silverblade Aramintha. So, they are removing her 25% combat readiness increase from Flame Release. And they're changing it to a detonates burns skill. So, Silverblade's already packed with burns, and now she can detonate burns. And you gotta understand, burns are 60% of the damage of your attack. So if you've got a 6,000 attack, that's 3,600 damage coming your way from a burn, and detonate lets both of them go off at once. So now we're up to 7,200 damage just from a 2-turn burn. God forbid you get a third burn on there. Detonating burns is going to make detonating bleeds look like nothing. This is going to be super, super strong. And let's see, Flame Savara, her passive. At the start of the battle, they're getting rid of this entirely, so who cares what that says. At the start of the battle, increases attack proportional to effectiveness. This is the first time we've had effectiveness affect another stat. So, depending on what the proportion is, right? We got to find out how much effectiveness increases attack. If it's a flat boost, if it's like for every so many points of effectiveness you get a 100 flat attack or something, then you can go relatively low attack, stack effectiveness up, and just let effectiveness boost it. But if effectiveness is modifying attack percentage based, like 50% of your effectiveness becomes a multiplier, so like a 100 effectiveness unit is a 50% increase to attack, then you're going to want relatively high attack as well, so that the modifier from effectiveness impacts it even stronger. So I'm interested to see how this proportionality works. But this lets you build a lot of effectiveness on this unit and not have to sacrifice attack nearly as much to do it. And that's good because this is a unit that you want to do debuffs. She is a tour de force control unit and DPS unit through burns. The rate of the attack effect does not change after it's activated. So what this means is putting an effectiveness buff on her is not going to increase this proportionality. It's just at the start of the turn and it's locked. If your effectiveness is buffed, that's not going to change anything. When the ally, except for the caster, ends their turn, increases combat readiness by 15%. So she's losing like 5% on her combat readiness, but it was that this could only be activated every 3 turns. Now it's going to happen every time an ally takes a turn. So this is kind of like a reverse Sage Ball, right? Sage Ball, CR pushes up every time an enemy takes a turn. She's going to push up every time an ally takes a turn. This will let you run her at mediocre speeds. You can run her with openers and like 1 or 2 units takes a turn and she's going to CR push to the front of the line. So you don't even need speed on her. She is her own bridge. There are precious few units who are their own bridge, that pack their own bridging skill into their kit. So this is an insane S2. And her S3, let's just look at the Awakened. Instead of a 65% chance to inflict 2 burns and then stun, now she just inflicts 2 burns. 100% chance. There's no effectiveness in the skill. You don't have to worry about getting this up to... You still have to worry about 15%. Nowhere in here does it say ignore ER. This is still an effectiveness ER check, but you don't have to worry about you missing because the skill's effectiveness isn't, or the skill's effect chance isn't high enough. She will just burn for 2 turns and then still has her stun, and it also opens up her skill ups for even more damage. They are also reducing her cooldowns, which that combined with how fast she's going to cycle every time the enemy takes the turn. You got 3 units on your team. Those 3 units take a turn. That's a 45% CR push. She's going to fly, and this skill is going to cycle fast. This is going to be a terrifying control damage unit to fight. This might be one of the most devastating control damage units. She might be on par with Death Dealer Ray on how she's going to control the team and how she's going to drop damage, whereas Death Dealer Ray is going to detonate his venoms to poison you and injure you. She's just going to detonate the burns and stun you instead of sleep you, which is even more debilitating. God, this unit with Death Dealer Ray is going to be horrifying too. My God. I'm really, really happy to see Silverblade Aramintha shoot back to the top of our attention. She's a beautiful unit, and she deserves it. Do it for the redhead, Smilegate. Well done. Okay, Last Rider Krau. Last Rider Krau was a meta unit a few seasons ago, right? He was a knight who could mitigate by carrying Arius. He could spam barriers, and he would do damage. The more you would hit him, the more his S3 would get closer to proc, and by the time the 3rd cooldown was used, his motorcycle hit you like a truck. So what did they do to him? So his passive, code number 00, when he's attacked by an AoE hit, he would always proc a single barrier for 1 turn. And it was proportional to his health. Now they're making it a 2-turn barrier. I'm not sure that's that big of a deal. I guess the interesting thing about a 2-turn barrier is it will automatically place this barrier in front of immunity, nesting immunity. So if you have immunity on on your units and somebody uses an AoE attack, it'll put the barrier up, and because immunity's 1 turn, it'll put this in front of immunity, making it almost impossible to strip the immunity with people that do single debuff strips. So that's about the only use, because his barrier's not all that. His barrier's not super strong, and having it for 2 turns really isn't that big of a deal. It's usually gone by the end of 1 turn anyway. But I think this will have an interesting interaction with immunity and give you give you a little bit more resistance against those units that like to strip your immunity off your units with these single turn debuff removals. Now, mobile weapon Siegfried, this is his big nuking skill that on the 3rd turn, it crushes people, and they're not changing a thing about his kit, except they're adding decreased skill cooldowns by 1 turn. So they're basically having his S3 give a Laya passive to everybody. Once he uses his S3, anybody who had their skills rolled back will have them put right back again. What's really nice about this is it makes him very resistant, or makes your team very resistant to units like Nakwal, like Lua. Units that can reduce your skill cooldown, he is now hard counters. Now, they did increase it to an 8-turn cooldown, which makes sense. They're actually adding more things to his kit, so you're going to want that cooldown up. But with the amount of counters and AoE things that are out there, 8 turns versus 7 turns isn't really going to change his usefulness that much. He's going to get this skill quite a bit. So this is a really solid change for Krau. Krau's biggest problem was he was a knight that mitigated, but not amazing. He gave barriers, but they weren't that huge. He could do damage, but it took him a while to get there. And then we got units like ML Senya, who does bigger damage and more mitigation, or same kind of mitigation and more barriers, bigger barriers. We had units like Ilanov, who does way more mitigation, can still do damage. It really left him kind of without a place. Power crept out of the meta, and that's the only reason Krau's disappeared, is he is power crept. Now he's not power crept anymore. Now he has got something no other knight has, and that's the ability to fix skill cooldown. So that's kind of a neat thing. That gives him a use in the game without power creeping anyone else. So this is a big W, I think, for Smilegate. They actually added diversity with this change. They didn't have him replace any other knights. They had him situationally counter other units, and gave him his job back. Gave him a good solid job of being a damage mitigation knight who can also solve this niche problem of skill cooldowns on your team. So I like that. Good job with that one. That's 2 solid W's for Smilegate, and one of them that I'm very, very concerned about, but we'll wait and see. Commander Pavel. So Commander Pavel's biggest problem, other than Ilanov turning off penetration, is he just didn't do enough damage anymore in a modern meta where things are so damn tanky they just survive. And lo and behold, they are changing it so that when you soul burn, instead of decreasing his skill cooldown, he nukes harder. So they're increasing the damage on his S3, so when you shoot things with the gun, those things actually might die. It's crazy that you could shoot things in the face and they'd stay alive, right? I don't know that this is going to change things. Cleave is in an incredibly bad spot, right? We've got Harsetti, who has basically turned off Cleave for everybody. There are so many hard stops to Cleave right now that I think it's not going to be easy to do it in the near future. And playing Commander Pavel in anything but Cleave is pretty impossible. You could work him into some high aggro fights, but you have to hide him behind Guiding Light, and even then he's kind of easy to kill. So I'm not entirely sure this change is going to be huge for Commander Pavel. We'll have to see. I think he's a unit without a place in the game. Designer Lilibet, the unit that everybody thought would counter Harsetti, and then much to our disappointment we find she doesn't do jack against Harsetti. So what did they do to change Designer Lilibet? So instead of a 75% chance to silence on her S1, she now has a 75% to decrease defense on her S1, which is nice because silence, it's a nice debuff, but for a single target debuff, silence really doesn't do a lot in this game, and people weren't exactly building her with tons of effectiveness anyway. And now you can soul burn it and get 100% chance to silence, or 100% chance to defense break, and it increases it to a 2-turn defense break. This makes her S1 actually matter. This makes her S1 do things in the fight, and that's huge. This is a much better soul burn than just increasing your chance to silence one unit. Now you can increase your chance to defense break, and if you get a defense break on most units in this game, especially a 2-turn one, they got to figure out how to get that off of their unit, or that unit's going to die. So I like this. This is a solid increase. It just makes her better. It doesn't make her broken, but it makes her better. Emergency Stitching. So this is her passive skill, and before it just increased defense for 1 turn, and now it still increases defense, but it also gives her immunity. So That's interesting, right? It seems counterintuitive at first because you don't want her to be immune. You want her to be debuffed because debuffs are what give her fighting spirit. She gains 10 fighting spirit for each debuff, so why would you want her to be immune to being debuffed? Just go keep her from getting fighting spirit. But this ties into her model disqualification skill. Model disqualification, instead of increasing the combat race by 15%, it's going to increase the combat race of all allies by 15% and penetrates the target's defense by 50%. So this lets her S3 do giga damage. It's not just a 50% defense penetration on a unit that can already crit. They're also, well, they're decreasing her damage a little bit, right? They gotta, because otherwise this would be insane. So it's not just a penetration by 50%. They are actually decreasing her damage a little bit to compensate for this. But I can see now why maybe you want the immunity, right? You don't want the debuffs to push her up, but then somebody else pushes her back, right? You want enough debuffs to proc her passives and give her immunity so that somebody doesn't CR push her back or silence her or stun her or do something that keeps her from doing these skills. So it makes sure that after the CR push happens, she gets to do the S3. So I guess the immunity, and it's only a one-turn immunity. After the CR push pushes her and the allies up, it guarantees you get to do the nuke. And then the immunity's gone and she can start taking debuffs again to start building her fighting spirit. This is the first unit I think we've had that's a potential counter to Death Dealer Ray, who is the undisputed king of Epic 7 right now when it comes to PvP. And that alone makes this a very nice patch, right? That alone is good. DDR S3s, and sleeps everybody, and designer Lilibet self-cleanses and pushes up. DDR can't S1 and put Lilibet right back to sleep again. This entire immunity cheese skill right here is written around being able to have DDR S3, Lilibet self-cleanse and push up, and then stop DDR from being able to put her right back to sleep again so that she can cleanse the whole team, drop some nukes, and do all of her stuff. So just for the fact she's going to be really good into DDR again and is bringing really, really good damage onto the table as long as they don't have Ilanov. If they have ML Ilanov, she's actually going to do less damage. But I think this is a really good change for Lilibet. So another W. They did exactly what they needed to do to give her job back, to give her a place in the game without making her broken. So another W for Smilegate. Like it. Twisted Eidolon Kayron. If you guys have watched me play Arena, you know I love playing this character. They took Sundering Slash skill and just got rid of it entirely. And we're changing the name of this skill to, we're changing the entire description of this skill to the following. Attacks the enemy with a sword, grants a barrier to the caster for one turn. So he's going to spam himself a barrier. And when triggers a counterattack, it changes to an attack that targets all enemies, and the barrier increases proportional to the character's max health. I've never much cared for the barrier increasing proportional to his health. He's an attack scaling unit. If a barrier increases proportional to health, you make him an HP scaler. If a barrier increases proportional to an attack, you make him an attack scaler. Anytime you make an attack scaler rely on health, or a health scaler rely on attack, you greatly increase the gear requirement to make the unit functional. And that has always been Kayron's issue, and I'm shook that they left this barrier proportional to his health thing in place. It means his barrier is going to be tiny. So hopefully they did more than just this. They did increase his damage when he counterattacks. We'll have to see the numbers. This could be a little nudge. It's rarely more than a 10% increase to damage, but we'll have to see. If they increased his damage, that's great, but I think that this doesn't do much for us at all. Wandering Eidolon. This is his passive, right? At the end of an enemy's turn, gains 10 fighting spirit, and when the fighting spirit is full, increases combat race the caster by 100%. It used to only do it by 10% or by 50%. This is actually a nerf. for his use in Arena. In Arena, you're probably cheesing by running this guy with Shooting Star Arcades, and anything that cycles his skills and makes him take turns faster actually breaks his synergy with Shooting Star Arcades. So this might make him cycle faster, and you do want to cycle faster to get to his big bang attack in PvP, but already they've not addressed his issues with survivability by making his barriers HP scaling, and they're weakening him for his current use in Arena. Hopefully the damage increase makes up for all of this, but I'm seeing no real functional change, a good change and a bad change. So far we're on the fence about Techron, but maybe they make it up in Sword of Requiem, which is his S3 skill. So instead of 2,000 additional fixed damage that can go up to 10k damage, they're doing 5k additional fixed damage, and it can go up to 15k damage. So this is a lot of extra damage on his S3, and to compensate, they're making it take longer to get there. You do get more souls when you use it, yay. They're decreasing the damage of the skill itself, so there is a world where you don't run this guy on any crit chance or crit damage, right? You just run him HP and defense. You say forget damage, they reduce damage, so they increase damage here, but maybe you just try to cycle him, and you make him super, super high HP, like an HP scaler. He's not really going to do any damage, and all you're doing is just having him live and exist, do his counters to nickel and dime chip away, and then try to drop the big 15k, 5k damage blasts when he does his ultimate skill. Or you try to seek some balance with some crit and still make him a good damage unit. That build, though, that no HP, that no attack, high HP build, that makes him useless in Arena. And I am not sure that this is enough to bank on being the be-all, end-all skill, that you're going to wait 4 skill, or you're going to wait until all of his fighting spirit is up and nuke this, and then wait 4 more turns and get the fighting spirit back up to try to do it again. I don't know. We'll have to see what people cook up with it, and I'm not sure that this is going to be enough to change his usefulness. To get an attack scaler to do damage, have the crit chance, and have the bulk to survive without any damage limiter or strong barrier or self-healing or mortality or anything to keep him alive. Without any of that stuff. I mean, God, why doesn't he have Kayron's passive, so if he gets to 1 health, he doesn't die? Something to let him stick around in the fight long enough to do his tricks. As it stands, I think he's still going to just die. The level of gear it's going to take to make this guy actually work with HP scaling barriers and keep him around this many turns, I think the only way to make this guy work is to put such an insane level of gear on him, you could probably gear other units better. So I don't think they've increased his overall usability. I think they are trying to increase his usability, but are going to wind up decreasing his overall usability. I'm sorry, guys. I play Techron more than most people, but I only play him in Arena. I'm sure there's people out there who use him in RTA. Maybe they can pipe up as to how they think this buff will be, but I think this is a whole lot of green text that's not going to change any of his usage. Hopefully I'm wrong, because I really like Twisted Eidolon Kayron. Okay guys, it's time for Melissa's 25th buff. After they completely removed her from the meta with their buff that was really a hard, heavy-handed nerf last time, she's back with buff number 25, and all they are doing is removing the damage dealt proportional caster's lost health to just increasing damage dealt. So they're just removing the condition from her damage and letting her do more damage. Her issue wasn't doing more damage. Her issue is the fact that she couldn't get the bonus curse damage hitting the unit she had just cursed, which let her be a tank buster. And since they nerfed how curse works like that, this had better be one hell of a damage dealt increased to let her be a viable single target nuke unit again. Because if it's not, there's no world where you would pick this over a whole host of other units that can already nuke and tank bust. Let's see, they are also changing an exclusive equipment. So, let's see, when an enemy is defeated by manifestation, increases the attack of all allies. They're just changing it to increases the attack of the caster for 2 turns when she uses her S3. Okay, so they're giving her her own built-in attack buff, and they're increasing damage. If it's enough to let her do the same kind of damage she was doing back when she could hit a cursed unit, if it lets her tank bust, it could bring her back. It could make her usable as a fast single target nuking unit. So it all depends on this number modified by increased attack. All depends on that. Until we see the numbers, I don't know. I'm skeptical, but if it lets her do what she used to be able to do, and that's get the extra nuking into the cursed units, then this is overall a good change. Oh, and for those who don't want this, you will be able to recall and swap her EE if for some reason you are upset about this change. Okay, Ice says, what are they doing for says? Attacks the enemy with dark energy. So let's see, they're keeping a 1-turn heal block, and they're removing everything else in this skill and replacing it with damage dealt increased proportional to the caster's lost health. Oh, sorry, to the target's lost health. The lower the enemy's health, the harder Sez will hit them. The closer they are to death, the easier it'll be for Sez to kill them. Great. And, Die Hard. Damage suffered in one attack does not exceed 51%. So they're keeping his limiter into his passive. And they're letting his S1 hit harder the more hurt the enemy is. And in his passive, they're adding, after an ally, except for the caster attacks, when the target's health is 30% or less, activates Encroach. Encroach can be activated only once every 3 turns. Encroach releases dark power to attack all enemies and increases the combat radius of the caster by 30%. Damage dealt increases proportional to the target's lost health. Interesting. Okay, so let's say you hurt somebody below 30%. Which, I know, that seems like a lot, right? It's like, what, there's only 3k health? It's practically dead already. Why do I need to do anything else? Well, there are some units that 30% health is still a lot of health. Look at Dragonbright Senya. 30% health could easily still be 12k health on that girl, right? If you attack that, if one of your allies attacks it, it's going to CR push. Says 30%, probably letting him take the next turn. Before he gets to take that turn, he's also going to release Dark Palette and attack all enemies with Encroach. And that damage is going to increase proportional to the target's lost health. So whoever you hit, Sez is going to activate Encroach as long as they are below 30% health. And that unit got hit. It could be a freaking Soul Weaver that just love taps it. It's going to push Sez up. He's going to activate Encroach. It'll probably finish off that weakened unit. Maybe, maybe not. And then he's got his turn to take. And now he can drop like his S3 into some unit, get the pop damage and blow up that unit. This makes Sez one of the best cleave anchors I think I've seen in a long time. It's really too bad Cleave's not a viable playstyle anymore. If Cleave was still a viable playstyle, this unit would be fantastic. I'd be building them, I'd be excited to use them, but Cleave is not a playable style right now, so I don't think that having Sez on there as a Cleave anchor will work. Now, can he be a viable unit to use in aggro? Possibly. He still suffers from a lack of survivability. You can put him on some evasion artifacts or mitigate him up, and then you can keep him in play so that all you got to do is nuke one. You have Janua, nuke a unit down to 30%, and then extra skill hits it again, kills that unit, Sez pushes up, does his Encroach, kills another unit. I think he's got some possibilities in aggro. It'll be interesting to see if people are able to make this guy work in what's left of aggro, but I think it's going to be tough. We'll have to see. Elena. Okay, so it wasn't actually a buff to Elena. It was a change to one of her exclusive equipments, and they're calling it an Elena buff. So before, dispels one additional debuff when using Eternal Shining Comet. This was her S3 skill, and now they're changing it to dispels one debuff from all allies when using Consecrated Ground. This is her passive skill, her S2 skill. And this effect is applied before healing. Important note, if one of the debuffs you're getting rid of is heal block, she'll get rid of that, and then the S2 skill will also heal. So this makes her insane into units that hit you with multiple debuffs. Peyra, and Ran are hard countered by Elena now. Hard countered. It does make her a little weaker into Luna because Luna's S3 skill won't proc this because this skill procs off of attack skills. And since Luna's skill is a non-attack skill, this technically makes her a little weaker to Luna, but it makes her significantly stronger against any of the openers that do an AoE attack. So she now hard counters Ran, she now hard counters Peyra. She's a pretty solid counter against Noctwell as well, so yeah. Everybody was telling me about Mort. Everybody's saying, you gotta check this out, it's gonna be great. So, it's crazy what they did with him. So let's see what they did. His extermination skill. Before, it just ignored ER when he was enraged, and had a pretty good chance, 50% chance to defense break. Well, now it still ignores the ER, but it's of any target with lower health than the caster. So you don't have to worry about being enraged anymore. If the enemy has lower health than you, it's going to ignore ER, and you've got that good solid 50-50 shot at a 2-turn defense break, and there's nothing they can do to stop it. You win the coin toss, doesn't matter how much ER they have, their defense broken. So that's pretty cool, and they're also increasing its damage output, so the Great Mortelix will hit even harder with Extermination. Now we got his passive, right? Absolute Dignity. Before he was immune to stun and sleep, and now he's immune to debuffs which prevent movement. That's stun and sleep, right? Are there any other debuffs that prevent movement? Slow doesn't prevent it, it just reduces movement, so he's not going to be immune to that. This must be future-proofing, right? So it allows them to add other debuffs that could potentially prevent movement to the pool, and he'll be immune to that as well. So I think this is just, this doesn't really change anything so much as this future-proofs us against additional buffs added later that can reduce movement. All heroes except for the caster cannot counterattack. Bloody hell. Okay, first of all, I love double-edged swords when it comes to skills. I think Smoggett should do more of these. Like how Bryceria blocks being able to raise people from the dead, not just for the enemy, but also for you. Mort stops counterattacks, not just for the enemy, but also for you. So don't troll and run this unit with other units on counter set or Elbrus. Elbrus is a counterattack, it's going to turn all of that off. What's also about this is not conditional. It just exists. Unlike Astromancer Elena, who's conditional. If she loses her buff by not S3ing, then people can counter again. I think Astromancer Elena is out of a job. I think Mort does everything Astromancer Elena does, and does it better. The only exception would be Mort is an RGB unit, so he's going to do a little bit less damage to fire units, whereas Astromancer Elena will do more damage to fire units than Mort, but less damage to everyone else, I suspect, with less survivability. This is insane change for Mort. He's completely replacing and removing an ML 5-star unit from the game. If you recently got Astromancer Elena, I'm sorry, she's a backup plan in case they pre-ban Mort for some reason, but you're not going to be able to play that unit anymore. If you have Mort, you're not going to want to play that unit anymore. Also in the past, because this passive is stacked, when an ally is attacked, has a 20% chance to counterattack, and after counterattacking has a 100% chance to use Sacred Blessing. So all heroes except for the caster, nobody can counter, but Mort can counter, and Mort has a built-in Elbrus. So that's 20% chance per unit. If you do an AoE attack, that's 20% chance, 20% chance procs. Because an ally, it doesn't say when somebody other than Mort is attacked. It says when an ally is attacked. And something you'll learn about Epic 7 is when they say an ally, they mean every single person on your team. They mean you, the player's allies. Right? The allies of the player, not the allies of the unit. Otherwise, they would say things like all heroes except for the caster. They would say when an ally except for the caster is attacked. But they don't. They say an ally is attacked. So that means anybody including Mort. So an AoE attack is going to have 20% chances to make Mort counter, and when he counters, he'll use Sacred Blessing. And God, if you put Mort on counter set, that's 20% chances to proc and a 30% chance proc from counter set. That's damn near a guarantee. You're chilling in the 80% range to counter off of AoEs and activate Sacred Blessing. Now, Sacred Blessing, thankfully, can only be activated once every 3 turns, but holy smokes, it's gonna be, if you're running AoE units, it's gonna be almost impossible to keep this from happening. And Sacred Blessing used to give skill or crit resistance and a speed buff. Now it gives skill nullifier and a speed buff for 2 turns. Speed buff and skill nullifier, which never goes away until you hit a person and make it go away. So instead of a chance to reduce the damage by not being crit, we've gone to a no damage will hurt you no matter what the first hit. And you got a speed buff. Wow. Holy shit, Mort. So Mort just became one of the most terrifying units in the game. I think Mort is immediately S tier just from this passive alone. He turns off counter sets. He does it better than Elena. He will counter, I'll have to do the math, but I bet it's in the 60 to 70% chance to counter off of AoE attacks range. No, it doesn't matter who you hit. He's got a built-in Elbrus, and God forbid you hit him and he's on counter set. He's got a built-in Elbrus that works in tandem with counter. This is a terrifying unit, guys. And he grants skill null to the entire team. You better have buff block on there. I think DDR might be the only thing that has a shot at stopping the Great Mortelix. And it increases speed so he can cycle this stuff even worse. Even worse. Holy smokes. And that's not even the ultimate skill. Advent. Mortelix. He used to inflict injuries, and they're getting rid of injuries in Enrage. And they're replacing injuries with a new skill effect called Inflicts Fear for 2 turns. So a whole ass new mechanic for the Great Mortelix. Before recovering health of the caster, he always did that and recovers health. Now he penetrates the defense of the enemy of the highest health by 70%. Good God. 70% defense penetration. And ignores effect resistance of any target with max health lower than his. Damaged. What here ignores the... I guess the fear. I guess they mean that the fear ignores ER. Is that what this means? Because there's nothing else to ignore ER. Usually they include it in the sentence if it's ignore ER. But you don't need penetration, or you don't need ER to penetrate. So I'm thinking the ignore ER works on fear, which means if you have lower health than him, you are locked by fear. And if that's the case, get wrecked. If you let this skill go off, you're dead. They increase the skill cooldown to 4 turns, which is fine because they're, you know, his increased speed is going to let him cycle a lot. Sure, why not? We'll give him more damage and more healing too. Sure, why not? Why not? We'll let you get more souls. Reasonable, reasonable. What else does he do? Fear. Cannot act for a certain number of turns. So there you go. This is a skill that impacts mobility because you can't take a turn. So he's going to be immune to units that prevent movement. He's going to be immune to fear himself. Fearless Mort. Now, right now, Mort's the only unit with fear, but if you play Mort into Mort, say in Arena or Guild Wars, or if they add other units with fear, he'll be immune to that. At the start of the turn, has a 40% chance to be dispelled. So like old school role-playing games where you had saving throws. Fear hits you when you take your turn, you make your saving throw, and if you roll 40% or less, then you get to not be afraid anymore, and you take your turn, and it's like the debuff never happened. Pokemon has something like this, right? With the paralysis skill, where there's a 40% chance to get out from under it. 40% is less than a coin toss, guys. Now, it'll only last for 2 turns, I believe. Right? Where's the fear? Inflicting fear for 2 turns. So at worst, you'll be afraid, not take a turn, you'll be afraid, not take a turn, and then it wears off. But you got 2 40% chances to come out from under the yoke of it. So think of it like a lesser sleep, right? A lesser sleep, a lesser stun. Think of it like a lesser stun. It's a stun that you have a shot from getting out from under. It's just a different kind of stun. It's a stun with a 40% chance to get out from under it. Man, what a crazy, crazy kit. I think if you are I think if you have a selector left and you don't have Mort, now's the time. We're gonna have to remake the selector tier list. Everybody's gonna have to make their selector tier lists. Because this guy just shot to the top. What an insane unit. What a fun unit. What a unit that removes RNG by taking out counterattacks, while at the same time adding RNG with this Fierce skill. Mort's gonna turn things upside down. I'm really excited to play Mort. I hope you guys are excited about him too, because this is crazy. Oh, and his exclusive equipment underwent a change too. Of course, because crit resistance isn't a thing anymore, so extends the Sacred Blessings, increase speed by 1 turn. Okay, so he gets a 3-turn speed buff. A 3-turn buff to speed with that EE, and it's on a 4-turn cooldown. He's gonna be zipping even faster. Mother of God. Okay, let's walk away from the terror that is Mort. He's a big W, but he also might be the most broken thing we've had to deal with in a long time. So Yulha's big issue was she just didn't hit hard enough. She didn't do her things well enough. So now, instead of a single attack reflecting 30% of the damage, it's any attack reflects 40% of the damage. So AoEs are no longer a problem. She'll reflect that back. They're basically turning her into a better Terranor Royal Guard with her reflect skill. And 40% of the damage reflected back. I think you could on purpose proc Senya once she has got Malicious Smile up. Purposely proc Senya, and then Senya can't use her S3, because if she does, Senya will probably die, having 40% of that damage reflected back into her. So that's an interesting mechanic, and it's I think it's got some pretty good use in this world of AoEs today. High damage AoEs. And Symphony of Agony, her big bang attack, they are reducing the cooldown so you can do it more often, and they're increasing the damage. They're letting you soul burn for more damage instead of extra turn. So just a net positive. The extra turn wasn't a big deal, guys. The damage, her not killing things was a big deal. So hopefully it's enough. We gotta see what the numbers are, right? We gotta see, does this damage increase on burn and the reduction in cooldown make her a functional unit? I'm not convinced she's going to be anything more than a very, very niche pocket pick, but maybe the extra reflect and the extra damage is all that she really needed to bring her back to the meta. We'll have to see. Blooming Lidica. What'd they do to Blooming Lidica? They just straight up said, you get 50% defense pen. She still does additional pen up to 100% based on the speed differential. So here's the thing. Blooming Lidica was supposed to be Harsetti's best friend, right? But the problem is Harsetti normalizes everybody's speed, and when you're saying you penetrate based on the speed difference, well, when there's 0 speed difference, you have 0 penetration, and just the raw power of her skill was terrible. It's pathetic. So she was doing like no damage at all. In fact, there was no reason to ever use her S3. She was just an S1 stun bot and her passive for use with Harsetti. So they're actually now letting her penetrate by 50%, and when you're going into fights without Harsetti involved, it's just going to be easier to spool her up to damage and let her be able to nuke things when there's not as big of a speed differential. This will let her be able to kill things easier. Now, with Harsetti, is 50% pen enough to, like, I don't know, one-shot, like a tanky Landy, for example? I'm not so sure, but at least her damage will matter, whereas before it hit like a freaking squeaky toy. Auxiliary Lots. What are they doing to Ox Lots? He gets 2 souls instead of 1 souls, and his 2-turn skill cooldown is now 4 turns. God damn it, Smilegate. Before granting the caster increased attack for 2 turns and going away, and now he gets exploiting weak point. Okay, so they're taking away his ability to spam his S2 and giving him exploit weak points. And in his S3, instead of silencing, it has a chance to defense break, so his S3 is still largely useless. Oxalots is being adjusted to reduce his effectiveness in PvE. No crap. No crap. That's exactly why you're doing this. You're tired of us being able to cheese some of your content. You want to make more content and not worry about Oxalots ruining your fun. You want to make it harder while enhancing his performance in PvP. He has no performance in PvP, guys. None of these changes are going to change his use in PvP. He is an old school cleave that cannot be done anymore. Anybody who tries this dies to Politis, dies to Abyssal Euphine, dies to Selene, dies to anybody who reacts badly to non-attack skills, which is a ton of people. He's not fast enough to take first turn, so he just dies before you can use the skill. The exploit weak points is fine, but you never get a chance to use it. And taking away, even when he was used in PvP, so much of his kit was centered around using Spirit's Breath. The combination of Oxalot's short cooldown skill, mana ejection, and Spirit's Breath has been created sufficient situations where its efficiency is become excessively high, making it difficult to control. So just say it with your chest, Smilegate. You had no problem with Oxalots. What you had was a problem with Spirit's Breath and its interaction with Oxalots. So this is your way to nerf Spirit's Breath without having to say we nerfed something. Because it let you reset one of the cooldowns on Alots' S2 so he could spam his S2 and keep pushing units as fast as he was able to move down the CR bar. And this allowed you to do a lot of things in the game that were hard. This is core to one of the easiest ways to beat Zeo on 410. Now you'll have to pay Skystones to beat that guy until you can build a real team. Dozens of Abyss and Challenge Abyss guides and Dagger Sakar guides are rendered irrelevant. Worse than irrelevant, they're misinformation. They're going to make people think they should do this when it doesn't work anymore. So that's worth having used a bunch of selectors and bottles on this, right? If you can't tell, I'm a little bit peeved about this one. This is how garbage this was. Smilegate tried to do this exact same thing back in January. With the January balance patch, they tried to do the exact same thing with Oxalots. 2-turn cooldown to a 3-turn cooldown. It was specifically designed to break the interaction with Spirit's Breath. And people got so angry about it because it was so scummy that just about everybody said, don't mess with Oxalots. Don't touch Oxalots. I knew Smilegate I didn't know Smilegate could disappoint us anymore. And it was so much outrage that they reversed it. Notice the strike through, they removed it from the balance patch because nobody wanted it. Everybody hated it. And you know what's different between that time and this time? This time, we're in the middle of a Foundation Day event where people have pulled for Spirit's Breath, where people have invested the hardest to get resources in the game, bottles of knowledge and selector tickets to get this artifact. Why? Because Smilegate has released more and more content that rely on the interaction of this artifact. And now they're bricking it. The community let you know before. Don't break this interaction, it's core to our game. Don't ruin Oxalots. They let you know in January. I hope they let you know again. I don't know how many times you have to be told the same thing. The community doesn't want this. The community has invested around this. Nobody wants this. If you want to find a way to release content that breaks this interaction, bake it into that content. But don't change the way this interaction that has worked for 6 years. Don't rip it out from under people, and don't do it especially right after new players who came to this game, got excited for and spent and pushed into this. I had so many people in my chat this morning complaining about how they used 2 selectors on this and a bottle of knowledge and were waiting for the next bottle of knowledge so they could finish it off. And now all of those resources are wasted. And they were asking me, is there any way I can get any of that back? And I'm like, no, Smilegate's leaving everyone hanging out to dry on this one. So if you aren't happy about it, make your voices known. Send some feedback. Tell them this is not okay. Because this is not okay at all. Now, as for a recall, the way a recall works, guys, is when you log in, If you have had the unit before the recall goes live, and if that unit is level 50 or higher, there'll be a little recall logo over top of the unit. If your unit's less than level 50, you can just level it up real quick. You'll get all that back anyway. But as soon as you get them to level 50, the recall emblem will appear. You click on it, and there'll be an option to recall the unit. And when you click recall, it will tell you this is what you're going to get back. And it gives you everything back. It gives you all of your gold that you spent leveling it, all of your catalysts you spent awakening it, all of your runes you spent, all of your Molagora invested, all of your charms, everything, all given back to you. And for every imprint you have in there, you will get a meteorite shard. Now, meteorite shards work like unknown slates, except they only work on they only work on 4-star units that aren't limited. So if you get those, you can use those to imprint any 4-star unit you have. Doesn't have to be Oxlots. And when you do this, your Oxlots, your one and only Oxlots from the recall will vanish, and you will be given a selector ticket. And that selector ticket can be used to purchase, to pick any 4-star in the game that was released before the selector tickets, before the recall activated. So on the 27th and before, any 4-star units. Once you do the recall, you'll get your selector ticket, and you can use that to get your A-lots back if you want. Or you can use it to get any other 4-star in the game you want, and you will not have A-lots anymore. If anybody has any questions on that, let me know. I'll link you to a video that shows how it works. Peacemaker Furious. Arguably the worst 4-star in the game. When used on the caster's turn, has a 40% chance to attack with the same skill. They're just getting rid of that and saying he can attack with the same skill as long as he's wearing a buff. So they made the condition a lot easier. As long as he's buffed, he gets 2 attacks instead of just a 40%. So that alone is a giant increase to his damage, over a 50% overall yield on his damage, as long as you keep a buff on him. He no longer grants Indomitable to the caster for 3 turns. This was just them trying out the Indomitable effect before they gave it to Ilanov, and now that they found out it didn't work on him and how to tweak it to make it work on Ilanov, now they can remove it and replace it with something better. And in this case, he's just giving a straight-up defense buff. So still speed and defense to all allies instead of just speed to allies and Indomitable to himself. So that's nice. Defense buff is good. Maybe this means he'll be usable in some Hall of Trials fights where you always seem to want a defense buff, right? And if you do a soul burn, you can extend the buff durations by 1 turn. So instead of 2-turn speed and defense buff, you can get a 3-turn speed and defense buff. I think that's the longest defense buff in the game. And, oh, and it gives him an extra turn as well. I forgot after it's awakened. So you're going to be able to soul burn this speed and defense buff to everybody for 3 turns. If you soul burn it, 2 turns if you don't, and then and that's before it grants the extra turn. So even after the extra turn, you'll still have the full 2 to 3 turns of skill on him. Extra turn. So you're going to be able to drop this S3 into an extra turn, into his S1, into an extra attack with the same attack. He's going to hit you 3 times. Bet you money this guy shows up in Hall of Trials. Bet you money. That's a lot of attacks. That's huge, huge, huge. And then his black hole cannon, his big bang attack, right? Attacks all enemies with a huge explosion, blah, blah, blah. They removed the conditional requirements to get this up to a 60% pen, and it just said, screw the conditions. He just does 60% pen. So, 60% pen means you're probably going to want him on a pen set. You'll probably want him on a crit set. And, yeah, it's just damage, damage, and more damage. His S3 will hit like a truck. It'll hit like the nuke it always should have. Stealing souls is kind of a nice gimmick, but not really that big of a deal, especially only 10. I think the big thing is his triple hits. We'll have to see what kind of damage he does. I don't know if this is going to change his usefulness, but it might make him a really good PvE unit. But we'll have to see. Veronica. I don't know why we're buffing Veronica, but I guess we'll see. Instead of a 20% combat radius increase, it's a 50% combat radius increase. Get wrecked, people who think that, although Cleave is dead, at least I can still cleave with BBK. Veronica's here to say, no, no, your high schooler with a sword's dead. With a 50% CR push, you can build Veronica so much more deadly. will work better against immortal foes. Why don't you just say, we're tired of people complaining about BBK, so here's your answer. So yeah, if you are tired of BBK, here's your answer. Grab that vampire hunter and murder anybody that tries to level a BBK at you. And Green Armin. Green Armin was, in my opinion, one of, if not the best counter cleave units in the game. And how do they make her better? Instead of when an ally attacks for the caster, it's just when an ally is attacked. She decreases damage suffered by 20 to 30%. Okay, so they increased her mitigation and they gave it to herself. So if people decide to focus Armin, she still gets mitigation, right? Because instead of an ally except the caster, it's now an ally. So it's everybody. Remember we said this. As long as it doesn't say except the caster, it's you, the player's allies, so it's everybody on your team. So they gave her more mitigation. They made her harder to kill. One of the best counter cleave units in the game is now harder to kill. If you like cleaving in this game, you need to find another game. Smilegate's practically made it a bannable offense. Sorry, cleavers. So artifacts. This makes sense. Cruel Mischief, right? The problem with Hall of Trials is the way, the multiplicative way that damage boosting works. And since we were already doubling the damage of certain units, and then they were getting another damage boost from certain skills that happen, plus the damage boost from this artifact, it watered it down so much that the additive way, I mean, or not really additive, but the additive way attack works, that modifying attack was having a substantially higher damage output. So much so that a 20% attack boost from the POS artifact, or even a 15% attack boost from Severed Horn Wand, which was pink-haired Ram's artifact from ReZero, those were doing more, significantly more damage than a 30% damage boost, if you can believe it. 30% damage boost from Cruel Mischief. And I went straight to Smilegate with this one. I said, how can you have an artifact that says it can only be used in Hall of Trials be outclassed by two other artifacts that are not obtainable by the players anymore, that are from collabs that, at least one collab that's never going to rerun, and another one that is less likely to rerun because they've already gone with a different IP. And I think this is a result of that. They are going to give us a artifact that just basically does what POS does, but better. So this change to Cruel Mischief is really nice because even at base level, they're making it as good as POS. And if you level it up, it's literally just twice as good as POS. There's zero reason to run POS anymore, except that POS does increase your crit chance and crit damage. But I think 40% attack is probably going to eclipse the crit damage and crit chance impact. It'll at least make it so close that people without POS won't feel bad that they have to use Cruel Mischief. It'll take some testing to see if the 20% increase to crit chance and crit damage eclipses the additional 20% to attack. Only time will tell and only testing will tell, but I think it will. So that's a pretty solid one. For those of you who are like, well, what do I do with this POS artifact that I dumped all these charms into? You know, it'd be nice if Smilegate gave us like some charms as compensation for basically removing the one and only use for POS, but this was a choice. You chose to increase POS to milk it for a little more damage. You could have just stuck with Cruel Mischief to begin with. And there's no way for Smilegate to do a recall on a limited collab unit. Not legally. It's not their IP to mess with. But it'd be nice if they gave like a little, here's some charms compensation for everything you wasted on POS, but I wouldn't hold my breath on that, guys. Pure White Trust. Oh my god, I was so excited when I saw this, guys. So instead of increasing the speed of the caster for 2 turns and increasing the critical hit damage of the next attack by 30 to 50, now instead you're going to gain 10 souls when you use a non-attack skill and a 50 to 100% chance to increase the crit damage. 50% crit damage boosts the caster. And souls can only be acquired once. So, you know, you'd use a non-attack skill again later in the fight, no more souls. So, this looks amazing. This looks really, really, really good. And then I couldn't figure out who could possibly use this. Right? Sirmia? Fire Sirmia is going to want to be a damage artifact. Zahak? Zahak's going to need that 20% penetrate evasion, or 20% of the time you're just not going to kill regardless of this, right? I don't know where this can be used. I had one person say, well, Lionheart Sirmia could use it. And I'm like, okay, why would you give up so much to force this on Lionheart Sirmia? Well, maybe I'm running Lifesteal, so I don't need Golden Rose or Sigurd's. Okay, so let's say you're running it on Lifesteal, you're taking a 50% crit damage boost, and you're sacrificing a 60% crit damage set bonus boost to run her on Lifesteal. And you're also giving up a 16% damage boost because Golden Rose does 16% more damage and this doesn't, all to gain 10 souls so you can soul burn her S1 right out of the gate. I don't think that's worth it. I think even if you're running her on Lifesteal, you're probably going to still want her on Golden Rose, but this could theoretically be used on her as a way to get 10 souls to soul burn her S1 after you S3 and give yourself a crit damage buff. If you are below 300 crit damage, this will be impactful. It's a crit damage buff, so it's not going to exceed the cap. I think this is an artifact without a home. Maybe one day a unit will come out that can utilize this, but I can't think of a unit that uses this well other than an inferior version of Lionheart Sirmia. Like, you just don't have the destruction set to build a proper destruction set Sirmia, or you don't have Golden Rose to put on her. This could be a way to make a Lifesteal Sirmia a little bit more effective. But if somebody can think of a better place to use Pure White Trust, let me know. Remember, it's a warrior artifact. Warrior has to use a non-attack skill, and I was pretty clear why I don't think it is any good on Zahak, Fire Sirmia, or Lionheart Sirmia. If you can think of anything else, let me know in the comments section. Rhianna and Luciella looks like a buff, right? Just straight up, here's 10% more attack. Now your real Rans can hit even harder. We'll get into it in a minute as to why this artifact is being nerfed out of the game. Hostess of the Banquet. This is Galililius's artifact, and no coincidence that Galililius's banner will be up right when this goes into effect. All they're doing is taking away the condition, right? It used to be if the target was healthy, you did more damage. Now they're just saying, look, you just straight up do more damage, and if the target's healthy, you do even more damage, right? It's 9 to 18%, so it's even more damage when they're healthy, and it works when they're not healthy. So it makes this a very good artifact. It's one of my favorites to run on Twisted Eidolon Kayron. So this is a really nice buff, but I think it's done more so that when everybody goes to pull for multiple Galililiuses or the first Galililius, they don't necessarily feel bad about getting this artifact. They made it an actual decent damage boosting artifact for thieves that boosts your ER. Now the battle system adjustment, and this is where I'm getting into as to why Rhianna and Luciella is no longer going to be a thing, right? They are changing the way extra turns work. Okay, so extra turns will continue to occur in subsequent turns. They're changing it to only one extra turn will be applied. No additional turns in subsequent turns. You've heard of S2, S3, S1 when people are talking about Ran. So what they're talking about is he'll use his S2 skill, then he'll use his S3 skill, and on one of those two turns, RNL procced, and then he can use his S1 skill. And if RNL had procced a second time in any of those three ones, then he can use his S1 skill again. I've even been in fights where one of those extra, he went S2, procced RNL, S3, procced RNL, S1, that was his extra turn from the first proc, hit. S1 again, procced another RNL, hit. And now his last proc that happened earlier, it activates, that allows him to go into his S2, S3, where he can proc another RNL. It's why RNL, Rhianna and Luciella, it's why people said RNL actually stood for Ran Never Loses. So there's been a lot of conjecture on how this will work. I'm going to try to break it down. If you S2 and you proc RNL, and you S3 and proc a second RNL, you will go to your S1 and be able to use the skill, but that second RNL proc won't work. Because you cannot have an extra turn. You can have an extra turn, but not an extra turn. If you S2, S3, proc RNL, S1, proc RNL again, it won't do anything because you're already in an extra turn and you cannot proc additional extra turns. You cannot have additional subsequent extra turns. So it is possible to S2, S3, S1, but you will never see Rhiann S2, S3, S1, S1 again. And that means Rhiann is going to universally go to a different, better artifact, because Rhiann Never Loses was a big part of his kit, and I'm not sure if just one chance to proc or one extra turn off of RNL is worth it for people. Maybe it will be, maybe it won't, but Smilegate realizes that this kills the one major use for RNL off, so much so that even though this is just a change to the mechanic, so much so that even though they buffed Rhianna and Luciella, they're offering a recall on Rhianna and Luciella, and also Butterfly Mandolin, which has a similar effect, nerfed effect for a 3-star. So, how the recall will work. When the recall goes live on the 27th, 24th, after maintenance, when you click on the artifact and bring the artifact butt up, there will be a recycle button on there that says recall. When you click on that, you will be presented with a screen that will show you everything that you're going to get back from the recall. Unlike the 4-star unit recalls, there is no selector with a 5-star artifact recall. With a 5-star artifact recall, you just get all of your charms back, right? All of your charms that you put into it. If you plus 30'd it, you will get enough charms back to plus 30 something else. And if you have multiple imprints in the RNL artifact, they will be reimbursed based on the limit break. So if you have your RNL at plus 21, right? You've got 3 RNLs fused together into a single plus 21 RNL. You will get 3 plus 0 RNLs returned to you. If by chance one of those limit breaks was from a bottle of knowledge, you'll be able to send a message to Smilegate telling them, hey, one of these or some of these were bottles of knowledge. Please take away my RNL that you restored to me and give me the bottle of knowledge back. And as long as that RNL is still on your account a few days later, they should go in, remove the RNL, and put the bottle back that you spent. But they will confirm it on their end that you had the bottle they're removing. I don't know anybody that bottled RNL, so it's kind of a moot point. If you had a plus 30 RNL, you're going to get 6 RNLs back. And then I guess you can powder some, keep them, throw them in the storage, and hopefully they'll be usable someday. I don't know. I don't recommend you ever powder a 5-star artifact, but this artifact is basically gone. And the same thing with Butterfly Mandolin. You can recall that. You'll get all of the charms and stuff you put into it back, and as many copies of Butterfly Mandolin as you fuse together, you will get those back individually as well as the gold that you spent charming them. But say it again, there is no selector involved with artifact recalls. So if you have any questions about how that works, hit me up on Discord, link in the description of the video. And that's it. All this is scheduled for the 24th. We're weeks and weeks away from this, and when it happens, this is going to change everything.